Welcome to Disrupt TV. I'm Ray Wang. I'm one of the co-founders of Disrupt TV, and I'm here today with my special guest, Liz Miller. This is our 4th anniversary show, and Vala is not here. That's okay.
I think I'm on all of the landmark shows. I was on the last show of last year, co-hosting for Vala, and now I'm on the 4th anniversary show. I'm beginning to feel like this could be a thing with Vala and myself. We're just gonna.
It is. We are asking for Vala. We are asking for Vala.
No, this is where we reveal that actually Vala has just really been a computer simulation for the last 4 years.
No.
Don't give away the secret.
Don't give it away. We've had 383 unique guests. That would mean Vala would not be one of those. So anyways, we're here to celebrate our 4th anniversary. And of course, you can catch us on Vimeo, YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes, and even on FM, AM radios, coast to coast. So this week's show, who's our special guest? We've got Pablo Breuer, Executive Cybersecurity Leader, Futurist Change Agent. You can follow him at NGREE_H. I think it's a 0 bit. He's currently the Military Director of U.S. Special Ops Command, Donovan Group, and Senior Military Advisor and Innovation Officer at SoftWorks. He served at the National Security Agency, NSA, U.S. Cyber Command, as well as being the Director of C4 at U.S. Naval Forces Central Command. He is DoD Cyber Cup and DEF CON Black Badge winner, and has been adjunct faculty at the National University, California State University, Monterey Bay, and a visiting scientist at Carnegie Mellon for CERT SEI. Pablo has taught classes for various user government agencies and industry on topics from malware reverse engineering and exploit development to cyber policy and authorities. He's got degrees in Comp Sci course and a PhD candidate in information science. And we also have Dr. David Bray in his new role as the Atlantic Council. He's actually incubating new global center and senior fellow in the Institute for Human Machine Cognition. Dr. David Bray needs no introduction, but we're going to give him a long one anyways. He's been serving a variety of leadership roles in turbulent environments, including bioterrorism preparedness and response from 2000 to 2005. He was on the ground in Afghanistan in 2009, serving as the nonpartisan executive director for a bipartisan national commission on R&D, and providing leadership as a nonpartisan federal agency senior executive. He's also been the former CIO of the FCC, and today he is one of the fellows incubating a new global center within the Atlantic Council. So a lot going on with him, but he's also been part of the executive director from 2017 to 2020 for the People-Centered Internet Coalition, chaired by Internet co-originator Vince Cerf, focusing on providing support and expertise for community-focused projects that measurably improve people's lives. He's also a Marshall Memorial Fellow, traveled to Europe in 2018. He's also done some work in the U.S. Navy and Marines on improving organizational adaptability, and he's also been working with the U.S. Special Operations Command J5 Directorate on the challenge of countering misinformation and disinformation online. There's so much going on here with Dr. David Bray. He's also an Eisenhower Fellow, and actually, he's also a public health major. So we'll get to all that and more, but more importantly, let's start with the hot topics that we got this week. Liz, what do we have? What are we kicking off with?
You know, we're going to talk about some disinformation, misinformation. And I think I want to start with maybe a foundational question for you guys, because I think that when we start to talk about misinformation and the age of misinformation, and we start to throw around the word, a lot of times some people don't know what it means, right? So what's the difference? What's the difference between countering, say, misinformation and disinformation? You know, when we're talking 2020 versus 2015, what are we talking about, quite literally?
Pablo, you want to jump on that one, or do you want me to?
I'll take a first quick swing at it. So what we're talking about here is information that's put out with an intent to deceive. We all make simple mistakes. Sometimes we correct those things. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about selectively choosing the facts that we put out, or the context in which we put it out with an intent to deceive. It's intended as the real purpose.
Really? Like what virus? What virus? Nothing's going on.
Yeah. So one of the examples I always use is, you know, Russia didn't invade a country. They liberated ethnic Russians. Okay. It's a matter of perspective, but I would say most people agree on what really happened there.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Pablo's really hitting on the key too, is oftentimes misinformation and disinformation. It's not like it's completely inaccurate. It's usually taking 95% of things and then just putting them out of context. And we've seen this happen most recently twice with two videos in which one was of the Speaker of the House, the other one was for a presidential candidate. Both those videos were accurate footage. It's just in one case, it was slowed down to try and make the person look drunk. In the other case, it was actually selectively edited to make statements that the person had said, make them look unflattering. And so I think it's really oftentimes you have to recognize that misinformation, disinformation, it's not that it's completely untrue, it's just, it's things out of context with the goal of making you reach the wrong conclusions.
It's like truth adjacent.
Truth, well, or just recognizing that again, I mean, and this is where people say they don't need to worry about their, like when people say I don't need to worry about hiding anything, it's like, well, yes, but recognize what happens when someone takes something you did and takes it out of context to make it look unflattering or make it look like you've done something you haven't done.
I wasn't here. I wasn't here.
Place different,
So,
right?
I really wasn't here. I don't know what's
Take the hand of the person behind you, Ray.
Right. We'll just have it go like this, right?
Oh man, but this is happening all the time, right? I mean, this level of misinformation, disinformation, it's being used in political campaigns. It's being used in, you're seeing it happen across governments around the world, but it's also happening in advertising in some weird way. So.
Oh, I mean, as Pablo is fond of saying, he's pretty sure that that sport drink is not going to automatically make him a better mountain climber. And so in some respects, to a degree, political rhetoric, advertisement has always had a little bit of things out of context.
But what's the difference between something aspirational and misleading?
Well, so I guess it's worth noting that this is not a new phenomenon. It's just come back. In the 1890s, we had the trouble of yellow journalism, which was essentially, emotional-laden headlines that were fairly fact-less. And what was happening at the time is people needed to sell newspapers. And so they were much more like pitching the emotions, pitching the, almost at the time, and Hollywood didn't exist, but the Jerry Bruckheimer equivalent of what was the news as opposed to the actual news. One might say what's happened with the internet is the internet has also killed newspaper subscriptions. And so now when people are now motivated to show a growth and profit in the news industry, don't be surprised if people are paying to ad clicks, and ad clicks are much more about emotional, sensationalistic headlines as opposed to what actually is the reality on the ground.
And these emotion-based cues, they're also ending up being a bit of cover for additional bad actions, right? It's not unusual to see folks using kind of the emotional arc of the time for misinformation to start sending out, whether it is phishing, whether it is, just outright trying to get people to click on a malware link. There's a lot of things that are going on here. It seems like there's a momentum building with all of this, it almost like right time, wrong place kind of feeling. So how is this, are you seeing this accelerate? Like we're seeing it, how it's happening over time, but where are we starting to see it go from here?
Pablo, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to see it accelerate. So Ray mentioned about advertising. So certainly advertising, if you watch a Coca-Cola commercial, there's a certain feeling that it's meant to impose, but they don't lie to you, right? They can't tell you that it's going to cure cancer like they did.
Like they used to.
Well, there were more potent ingredients in there before, right? I mean, today it's a little
arsenic thing, whatever. Cocaine,
arsenic, cocaine, but it's a little watered down. I don't know.
But invariably, as David pointed out, a lot of these stories are meant to hit an emotional cue and get you to react instantly before your higher order brain functions react and go, maybe there's a little bit more to this. So typically, if you see it on an internet page, it's called clickbait. Right? It's there to, enrage you so that you'll click and follow the link. The other thing that's different is, it used to be the case that there were only so many channels and the channel had to approve your advertisement. And if it was something really bad, the FCC might go, no, you can't put that on. The problem with social media and with the internet is there's no such gatekeeper function. And so anybody can really put up anything on there. And on top of that, the response, rating how well your message is getting across is almost instantaneous because you get those likes and those retweets and those click links. And so the ability to now see how effective your message is with different demographics, tweak that message and put out a new version happens at internet speed. And that was something that did not happen before.
Yeah.
And I think what Pablo hit is so key is that the democratization of the fact that anyone can now both receive and communicate messages, while that's in some respects a good thing, it does introduce these instabilities in the system, and it's creating what I call, and I share, I think we're in an era of ragetainment, in which we've discovered that the number one way to make something go viral is to make one group of people angry and the other group of people angry in response. The number two way to make something go viral, incidentally, is to make one group fearful and the other group fearful in response of that. So given that this is sort of where we're just discovering human nature responds to things that are angry and fearful, again, before our higher parts of our brain kick in and say, well, wait, maybe there's more to that story, or maybe someone's trying to hijack my thinking. We've got to figure out, maybe we need a completely new way that sort of says, pause. If you're feeling your emotions go up, your blood pressure go up, pause, and then come back to it and say, why might somebody be trying to activate my anger or my fear responses?
But how do authoritarian governments control? I mean, they're basically censoring all the time, right? They're fighting this. They're fighting back on their own. It's automated. It's actually even worse. Maybe there's only one channel, but they kind of ignore the other ones.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Ray, that in some respects, actually, autocracies might be better poised to deal with the challenges of misinformation than more open societies, because they choose their version of the truth. And if you don't like it, you have a choice of either being imprisoned and or killed. I'm not saying I'm for autocracies, clearly, but I raise that because we have some really thorny questions to ask about open societies, which is, if we take down something or if we remove it from the internet, then we've legitimized censorship. And do we want that? But at the same time, if we leave it up, the research shows nobody remembers the not true part. So if you say X is not true, or you even label it, this video is suspicious, unfortunately, while consciously we may say, yeah, I see that, it still had the effect of it's activated our confirmation biases and it made us think a certain way. And so the damage is already done. So this is going to be hard. It's going to be really hard for open societies. And it raises the big question, which is, are we discovering that our brains aren't ready for the technologies we're unleashing? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now
this is before implants. This is before implants. Think about that.
Well, I think at a minimum,
read a great story, David,
when your confirmation bias kicks in. Like,
right.
how do you know when your confirmation bias is present?
I read a great story last night, actually, David. I'm not sure if you saw it. It was kind of outlining Estonia's program to combat misinformation. And especially with Russia's kind of push towards that specific to Estonia. And one of the things that jumped out at me, and it made me actually think of you guys, and actually the both of you specifically, one of the things that jumped out was this incredible program that they have built that has involved quite literally everyone in their community. This isn't just, like Cyber Command trying to take over or let's clamp down on information. They have gone out and they have enlisted teachers. They've enlisted, just someone down the block, like your grandmother, to be the person that when misinformation pops up, when people start to circulate that, when they have that emotional response, like you said, David, that there is someone activated in the room that says, hang on, wait a minute. And it may be that Estonia has a smaller community. They're able to do it. Can we replicate that, at the scale of the US? But it struck me as kind of something that you had mentioned, David, at CCE 2019 in Half Moon Bay, that we have to start building these communities where we are saying, hey, stop, let's think about it. Let's ask the question. How do we build that network effect of almost like a CRM for the truth, right? So how do we start unraveling this? How do we, we kind of see how we got there, but how do we start to tackle some of these things other than, even asking a question? It seems like a really hard place to start.
Pablo, you want to jump on that hand grenade or me?
Oh,
take one for the team. Take one for the team.
And you can say how I got it all wrong.
Right.
So yeah, there's a couple of things that I think could be done. One of the things that's been very effective in combating misinformation is something we've been doing in TV for a few years now, which is in television, they call it a tape delay. to make sure that before something goes out, do we really want this thing to go out? And one of the ways in which misinformation is really effective is virality. And so if we can slow the rate at which it propagates, we can really give it a second look or a third look and decide, hey, is this really something that's true, or is it malicious? Was it a simple mistake, or was there bad intent there? So I use social media just like everybody else uses social media. I don't think I've ever sent out a tweet or a Facebook message that had to go out right now. It hasn't happened. If you find out, half an hour from now that I just had a baby, then that's it. And that's
oh my God, man, that's amazing. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a
I did not have a baby. That's misinformation. My wife had one, but that was some years ago.
Don't send gifts today. We're good.
Well, no, but this is a real one, right? I mean, look, I was reaching somewhere, I can't remember what source it was. I mean, the World Health Organization is trying to fight, besides the coronavirus, an infodemic, and like an infodemic. I mean, that's at least that's what they're calling it. It's infodemic, right? And basically people are like putting up rumors about this whole Wuhan virus on a lot of different things, right? So how do you fight that?
Well,
right?
We've had a couple of incidents here in the last month, actually. So the first one that jumped out was when the U.S. conducted the attack on General Soleimani from Iran. Within about 6 hours, misinformation campaign on memes targeting 18 to 25-year-olds came out saying that a draft was going to be instituted, we were going to war, and if you'd accepted a federal Pell Grant for education, that you were going to be on the short list to be drafted.
Yikes. And
it spread so quickly that the Selective Service and the United States Army both put out messaging saying, no, that's wrong, via their official social media channels. That was one. The other one that came up was just recently with the Iowa caucuses, with the miscount, and that was within a couple of hours that no, it wasn't a mistake in programming. It was a hack perpetrated by the DNC deep state because they were unhappy that their mainstream candidate wasn't the one that won. And then, of course, these things are preposterous, but if you've already got that bias to believe that sort of thing, you're going to see it and you're going to forward it. And if you've got a bias to think it's absolutely ridiculous because you're emotionally invested and you're a diehard DNC fan, you're going to forward it and say, can you believe this nonsense that's going out? But either way, the message propagates.
Got forwarded, yeah.
And then I think what you hit the nail on the head is unfortunately, these things are getting shorter and shorter time windows before they start propagating. I mean, the sad statistic was about 4 years ago, after a school shooting or some violence at a school, you might see 2 or 3 conspiracy theories, fake news that might present itself about 12 to 24 hours afterwards.
Do you guys worry? Do you guys worry that there's an AI bot like that's creating these, and then on the other end there's another AI bot fighting these, right? And the cycles even get even faster.
Well, so that's just it.
Hits the red button.
It's much easier to propagate, Ray, than it is spread. And so we are seeing. I mean, we're now seeing literally after a school shooting. Unfortunately, you're seeing within the first hour or two, you're seeing at least 10 or more different conspiracy theories that are completely erroneous occur. And so there are a combination of humans in the loop plus bots that are there to spread misinformation. The challenge, though, is it's not a field that favors the defenders, because the moment you're coming out and trying to say X is not true, you're actually repeating the meme, you're repeating the conspiracy theory, and so
you're better with a look squirrel campaign.
Well, I think it's actually just letting people know this is happening, and actually, as Liz was commenting, I mean, Estonia is doing a good example. So is Latvia and others, where they're trying to engage the local communities. I think the United States has a challenge of we're 330 million people spread across a very large geographical landmass. Can we do the same thing as Latvia and Estonia? Not certain. But at a minimum, we've got to start having more local ties that people can go to. But I like to ask people to raise their hands and say, how many of you know more people in your local neighborhood than you do online?
Well, hey, Iowa caucuses don't scale anyways. We understand that. Hey, so authenticity versus deep fakes then. What's going on though? Like, how do we know when something is real, right? We're blurring the line between reality and fiction, right? I mean, this causes riots, it incites violence.
Well, both Pablo and I came from the field of intelligence, and how does the field of intelligence knows anything so well? You triangulate, and then you give it a probability score. I mean, you never know if it's true. but you at least try to get as many different approaches on it. And if you get enough things that are beginning to converge, then you're more likely to believe it. If you have a single source, that may or may not be the case. So.
Is there, you know, I think that with deep fakes too, there comes the issue of a lot of times horrible, negative. I mean, we even saw one, David, you showed a great example of the, you know, here's the actress, here's not the actress, like here's the actress in the post-Oscar speech. This is not the actress in the post-actor, you know, in that post speech. There are times, and I think when we start to talk about that malicious intent behind that, really bad. But I think from the technology side, there are also some amazing things that are being done with the technology. And I think it's that weight of that balance when we start talking about ethics. So where, you know, what are some things that you guys are thinking about as this conversation continues to ramp up and speed up around AI ethics? Like, are we going to get to a place where everyone's going to be, you know, able to live with where we land, right? I can't unsee any of that now, right? I can't unsee it. Looks like a blueberry muffin
or is it a
corner.
chihuahua? You tell me.
I can't unsee it. But you know, I think that how do we get to a point where the conversation becomes really fruitful and where we start to move things forward versus a lot of times I feel like we're in these kind of fits and starts. Like we have a great conversation, everyone gets together, everyone's on the same page, and then everyone's like, but then that video was funny. So like we all of a sudden backpedal and we backtrack. Where are we? Will we get there? And what do you guys think is going to be that final push that kind of pushes us over to some place where we all kind of start to agree on a start point? More grenades. Over to you, David.
All right, I'll go first. I'll jump on this grenade. I would say things are going to get worse before they get better. The tipping point will be when people actually recognize this is having damaging economic effects to their local communities. Until then, the challenging thing is everybody's aware of the issue, but both sides of the political aisle think it's more impacting them, hurting them than the other side. They don't realize it's a common problem. Countries as well, that countries around the world are being affected by this. Really, the turnaround point will be eventually when we realize, wait, this is having negative economic impacts, both globally and to our local communities. Now, where do you start? It really has to be a conversation about the future of data. Because like it or no, we're already at 47 billion network devices on the planet relative to 7.6 billion people, which means conservatively in 2 years, we're gonna probably have 10 network devices for every one person on the planet. We're probably also going to be producing more data on the planet by 2022. We're probably going to be about 150 zettabytes, 150 billion terabytes of data. We're going to be producing more data than all conversations we've ever had as a species times 3. So in that ecosystem in which we're awash with data and we have the opportunity to know more about the planet and people than ever before, the question we have to ask is, one, what choices do you have in that environment about data about yourself? And then two, how do we make sure in this environment that's going to be awash in data, we can have conversations and reach some convergence about what we believe to be true versus the alternative? But we've got to start with the data conversation. I feel like all the conversations about AI, they are so premature because if you look inside most organizations right now, their data is a mess. And so they can't even begin to embrace AI until they address the data side.
It's like we're regulating cheese without regulating the milk.
100%.
Yeah. Pablo, you got anything on top of that?
No, I think David's spot on. I think what really keeps me up at night is with text and with static pictures, it's relatively simple to show that they've been manipulated and they're not true.
Yeah.
It's much harder with audio and with video because you really need a PhD computer scientist to come out and show you where the forensic artifacts are. And if you're inclined to believe the message, you're just it's gonna go over your head and you're gonna go, I know what I saw and I know what I heard. And you're just trying to befuddle me with a bunch of academic speech. And so that's what really keeps me up late at night. How do we get past that? I think part of what we can do is what the internet did was great. And David said it earlier, is it democratized the ability to reach a mass populace.
Yep.
And that's wonderful. And in most places on the internet, you can do so anonymously, and there are pros and cons to that. And in a Western society, we like to think that there are more pros than cons, and so we support that. So what's left is we need to be able to tell where a message came from. We need some sort of data provenance. And so if you see a news story on TV and it comes from, say, ABC or CBS or NBC, you're probably going to believe it. If you see a news story and it comes on HBO, you're going to go, oh no, HBO's an entertainment channel. They don't typically do the news unless it's one of their talk shows, right? Or if it comes on the Comedy Channel, right? Oh no, this is coming from Saturday Night Live. It's not real news. It's a parody of the news. But it's because you know the source of it that you're able to lend it the appropriate level of kind of.
Oh my God. I was thought Dennis Miller was real news, but okay, go ahead.
But
no
have
judgment.
A good point, Pablo, because I love your point, but I'm also tying it back to something that David said earlier, right? Which is we now are in a news cycle where it's not unheard of, like whichever you're gonna turn on Fox, you're gonna turn on CNN, ABC, whatever you turn on, whatever you choose to trust. Mm-hmm. They're now running with stories about a deep fake. They're now running with stories that might actually be fake and they don't even know about it. Because to some degree, David, what you were talking about with the yellow journalism, let's be real, some of these stations are also possibly maybe pandering for ratings.
Oh, you're in I mean, it's worth noting that, remember, yellow journalism, one of the people that propagated the most in the 1890s was this individual named Pulitzer, which, by the way,
hey, only a prize named after him, but that's okay.
But I raised that, and let's go even further back. Let's, because people are acting like this is new. It's worth noting the story of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Here they are, best of buds, signed the Constitution. And they actually choose to run for office with John Adams as the president, Thomas Jefferson as vice president. First term goes great, come up for the second term, and Thomas Jefferson decides he wants to be president. So he hires a political hitman to spread misinformation saying John Adams wants to go to war with France. What's different is now it's not just limited to a few people that are able to do that, it's that all of us can do that, plus the bots. I mean, the reality is we're now actually the minority on the internet. I think it was 2013 when internet traffic was now 60% bots and 40% human. So in this world, I think what you asked a question about news. What we may be experiencing is when you're in a for-profit news cycle that needs to show quarterly growth, don't be surprised if then you're turning to ad revenue as the way to, because no one's paying for subscriptions anymore. But what
to your point, if I do turn to ABC to try to figure out if something is true or not, and they're running the story, I'm seeing that, like, are you finding that it's even harder to try to kind of pull people out of that cycle of wanting to believe what they want to believe?
Yes, so there's some of that. So part of the problem is, again, if you were in America in the 1980s, you had three choices for news. It was ABC, CBS, and NBC. And so you could agree with the coverage or disagree with the coverage, but when you talk to your neighbor that was maybe at the opposite side of the political spectrum, at least you saw the same story. And so you had a common point of departure. Now, if you get news channels that are on opposing ends of the political spectrum, they're not even covering the same stories. The narratives are completely different, so there's no common point for which you can have just civil discourse.
It is so true. I mean, did he shake or didn't he shake? Or was that really just recycling going on in the background? But you see these things, right? They're happening in the back. But hey, real quick, programming note, we are here on episode 177, co-hosted with Liz Miller. I'm Ray Wang. Vala Afshar is on break today. It is our 4th anniversary show. He will be back next week. We are here with Dr. David Bray, Pablo Breuer, and more information about fakes, deep fakes. Maybe we're really not on the show. All right, so talking about what's going on here. So how do we protect ourselves from this, right? I mean, is there any way to protect ourselves? I mean, we started talking about communities. We started talking about maybe there's some algorithms along the way, sources behind the news, being trust those validated sources. Like, do we have to go back to validate like social media sources? These are officially trusted sources, but by whom and how? Like, well, how do we answer those questions?
Well, I think if anything, there's a good news story here, which we are recognizing that it's always been about beliefs and stories. When people talk about truth, it really, at the end of the day, it's what truths you choose to subscribe to and stories. And as Pablo mentioned, in the past, we had 3 stations to pick from, and now we have more than 3 million. But I think you can look at what some countries in Europe are beginning to do, which is they are providing for different news outlets something other than just chasing ad dollars to fund what they do. Now, I realize in the United States, we're kind of skeptical of anything that smacks of using our taxes to fund the news or anything that looks like state-run enterprise, but it might be worth an experiment that says, for example, C-SPAN. C-SPAN was actually created when this new technology called cable came out. And they said, well, maybe when you subscribe to cable, a portion of your cable subscription will actually fund C-SPAN, so at least you have an authoritarian source of what's actually going on the floor of the Congress. Maybe we need something like C-SPAN that says, look, when you subscribe to your mobile phone plan or something like that, a small percentage will go to a public pot for different news outlets, and you can actually exercise choice. You can say, pick up to 5 topics, nonpartisan in nature, that you would like to see more news about in the next year, that your contribution will go to. And so we're recognizing that the heart of the problem is advertisement dollars subsidizing news. Don't be surprised if that leads to ragetainment. Maybe we've got to fix this with a different economic incentive.
That's crazy, right? I mean, think about this, right? We've got to fund something to figure out the fake news that works in democratically elected governments. Imagine an authoritarian regime. How do we expose what's going on?
Well, so the authoritarian regimes work because they have that monopoly on public information,
Media. Yeah,
right?
They do.
And so as soon as they lose that monopoly and there's an alternative view that can be reached by the populace, that autocracy crumbles.
But they've choked me off at the internet, right? We're seeing the divergence of 2 internets. That internet split is happening, and some people say it's going to happen next year with China and the US.
Well, I think what you're hitting is that without a common narrative to hold together a nation, that nation pulls itself apart. And I would say, in some respects, we've been seeing this. The further we in the United States get away from World War II, we lose that reminder that says, look, you may differ in these things on the left or the right, but we all agree we don't want another World War II-like event to happen. And so in some respects, we're a victim of our own success, that it's actually a fairly good time, peaceful time to be alive, even though it feels very turbulent at the moment.
That's interesting. So there's got to, I think that, and we've brought it up a couple times, of there's kind of nothing on platforms. There's nothing on, whether it's a social media platform, there's nothing really on the internet that is that pause delay. That's that 1 second where it's like, we know someone's going to curse in the middle of the Super Bowl. Like, let's just wait a bit. We can hit the beep button, right? There is no beep button on the internet. But should there be more cooperation, if we're just looking at the US for just a moment, right? Should there be more cooperation between, say, the Silicon Valley, the regions, whether it's, whether we want to look at Silicon Valley, Austin, Boston, like everywhere the nerd bird flies? Should there be more cooperation there and DC? Or are we just going down a path where every time, I know that when I start talking to people, even around recent data regulations, it's really easy to start eye rolling, right? Because how a lot of the verbiage, how a lot of it can come together feels like there are like Mack truck size holes, that we're just all kind of cruising through to get around what maybe some of the intent was. And everyone's language differs. Everyone's kind of going in different directions. Is what we're missing cooperation between the people who are building it and the people who are trying to give us some guide rails for it?
I do think we're missing cooperation, but it's worth understanding why. I think one is, again, we don't have that burning platform that says we don't want a World War II event to happen. We've forgotten there's this thing called Tsar Bomba, which was launched in 1961, which was the largest weapon ever detonated. But if detonated today, would have all of Paris in a fireball and another 35 kilometers surrounding it as a radius completely destroyed. I mean, so we've lost that sort of, why do we need to work together anymore? And then it's a question of who. Is it with your specific country you're in? Is it with the world as a whole? Well, the trouble is the world as a whole, who do you go to? I mean, the state of world governance is at its default anarchy. And so transnational corporations are probably trying to figure out what's our role relative to different nation states as the world as a whole as well. And then you've got a public that's skeptical of all the above. The public doesn't trust the governments they have, they don't trust the private sector they have. And all these things are happening at an accelerating pace. I mean, everything we've talked about here, We haven't even dived into what happens when now people can actually fake your biometrics, when people can fake your DNA, when they can actually use your DNA to make personalized medicine, but also make personalized poison. This is all going to happen in the next 5 to 8 years. And the question is, we can't approach it like how we approach things in the 70s or 80s. We've got to figure out new ways of working together and new ways of collaboration.
I think that's a really good point, David, about the fact that personalized medicine could be used against you, because understanding your genome means I can know exactly where your fault lines are and actually go kill you, right? Using something super targeted, right? In a way that we've never thought for, just a specifically set of targeted viruses or disease pathogens based on your DNA profile.
Even worse, if I know your DNA, I can actually sequence your DNA and sprinkle it at a crime scene. And then of course, every court's going to say, your DNA was there.
It was. Don't know how I got there, but it was there.
Bray's suddenly on a new 2020 episode about like backgrounds and stuff. All of a sudden, we got some crazy thing going. Pablo, let me ask you this, because I love, David, what you just brought up, and I think it's so critical to think about the kind of how we got here. You know, Pablo, your experience, I would argue, probably like gets you to GOAT status in security. Like your background, amazing, right? Like to say that you're an expert in this, I kind of feel, well, quite frankly, to say that both of you are experts in this kind of makes me feel like expert isn't the right word. Like you guys are like at the tip of the spear on a lot of this stuff. And so, Pablo, I want to ask you this. When we start talking about how we start coordinating, how we start cooperating, how we start bringing all of this together, what are some of, because you've arguably worked on some of the largest orchestrations of trying to bring people into one, into one space and moving all together. What are some of the things that you've seen work? Because I think that for a lot of companies, and the things I tend to hear a lot about when people start to try to tackle this feels really hard. I've got to go work on my stock price, or this feels like a circular conversation. I can't go do this, or what could I possibly do to change any of this conversation? But to David's point, we have to have these conversations. We have to ask these questions, and we all have to figure out a way to cooperate. So Pablo, what are some of the things that you've seen in your experience get people to move from, I don't think I have to, or I don't want to, it's too hard, to, okay, I'm willing to have the conversation at least?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the first answer is always education. And that is a deceptively difficult answer. The reason that's deceptively difficult is if we start with all of the children that are in school now, we're still going to have to wait another 10 to 15 years till they're adults. And frankly, we're just not going to make it that long.
Yeah.
So there needs to be, we need to be able to help out industry a bit. So a lot of industry wants to do things, but they have to explain why they're doing things that may cost them money to their shareholders.
Right.
So we've heard Silicon Valley companies go, please regulate me so I can go back to my shareholders and explain why I'm doing these things that are going to cost me revenue. The problem is that we don't have a nonpartisan body that's going to educate our legislators on what they're voting on. And so we end up with unfortunate circumstances where we've got leaders in government asking social media, well, I don't understand how you make your money. So we really need a nonpartisan body of tech experts that can advise government on how the technology works, what the limitations are, what the dangers are, and kind of what some of the best practices are. What is the risk that we're accepting, and is it acceptable risk or is it unacceptable risk? And if it's unacceptable, what do we need to do? And then pass some common sense laws that industry could then point to and go, well, the government told me I have to, and that's why we're going to lose this. That's why we're no longer going to take political ads on social media, because we can't guarantee the truthfulness. I think the other thing that we're going to do, and I forget the name, so David's going to bail me out on this, is in the 90s, Silicon Valley was really, really successful at convincing the US government not to regulate it, and that they weren't media, that they were a fledgling industry. And so the draconic laws that we had for radio and TV were just going to stifle innovation. And at the time that may have been true, but now I would say that most Americans get at least some portion of their news from the internet. So maybe it's time to revisit that situation and have basic controls in there. So if I watch a political ad on TV, or if I hear one on the radio, by law, they must tell me who paid for that political ad. And that goes back to, I know how to listen to the message because I know who paid for it. There's no such protection on the internet. And so when something comes out, I have no idea where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And so some of these things are very, very basic. The other thing is, I think that a marketing model needs to change in the news business. So sometimes news organizations put out bad information, not because it's intentional, but because they made a mistake. Well, if you pick up the first page after the cover page is the retractions and corrections. I would really like to see that for other social media, right? Last week we reported, and some, you know, some news organizations and news programs are really good about that. The one that comes to mind is 60 Minutes does that.
Yeah.
Some don't, and it's be nice to think it's because they don't make mistakes, but realistically, everybody makes mistakes. It's a human thing, even without malice, and so we have to be willing to admit. So wouldn't it be great if there was a truth rating, right? And that's what the news organizations marketed on.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that we've got the most viewers. It's that we retracted the fewest amount of stories. We were the most truthful one, and that's going to get you more viewers. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. So instead of rage-tainment, you actually get news. The other part that's missing is we've kind of blurred the line between news reporting and editorials.
The news magazine show.
There should absolutely be a label that says, this is now an editorial. And you see that in print media. You don't see that in other media. But
Anderson Cooper is not necessarily reporting here. He is actually giving you his opinion, right? It's the delineation between that we used to have. Even anchors used to have it. Journalists used to have it. And I think we've walked away from that a little bit, haven't we?
We have. And so, you know, it's very easy, you know, and I shouldn't say it doesn't happen on any other media. Again, 60 Minutes, when they had Mike Wallace at the end, that was his editorial. And it was very clear that it was his editorial. There was no confusing it. So being clear about what are facts. Okay, now I'm going to give you my opinion of the interpretation of those facts, I think is critical.
Yeah, yeah. That background just keeps changing, and I feel like Ray is just being like the deep fake in the corner. Is anyone else getting that sense? Like right up there, like right there.
Well, this one's the math problem, right? I mean, you're looking at this, right? Is that the Chihuahua or is that the muffin, right? This thing irks me all the time, right?
I can't unsee that now. I can't. It's like the gold dress one, where it's like, is it gold? Is it blue? Now I just want a muffin.
But I want to build on what Pablo was saying, because I think he raised some very good points. The one confounding factor that we have is going back to the internet. So in the 70s and 80s, you didn't have global reach. Now you do.
Global distribution. You have global creation.
Regulation, it's like, which countries' laws are you going to apply? Which states' laws are you going to apply? Are you going to end up with 50 different states with 50 different privacy acts? And so we've got to figure out new ways of collaborating and governing that are different than everything that came before, recognizing that we may be facing a very real situation where things that used to be done by government can't solely be done by government now. They have to be done.
But David, the Chinese government thinks they've solved everything. Right?
Yes, Ray. I know you like to throw those little footballs in our way. But
I'm being serious. No, they're saying we can give you a nice dictatorship country, our version of the internet, and it'll be clean. People will be happy. It'll be purposeful. There won't be any fakes. You can control all the media. We'll let you control all the media so that you can be the censor, and there will never be any fake news.
And at the same time as well, because there's no separation between the public and the private sector, they can also outperform those countries that do separate their public from their private sector, and the public and private sectors are stuck trying to have friction with each other. Yes. So I think that is the motivation that says, look, that may work for some countries, or they may choose to do that. But if you're from a country that does not want to embrace that future, you've got to figure out new ways of your public and your private sector, as well as your public in general, working. Otherwise, those approaches will outperform.
I keep coming back to that Estonia article. I'm so sorry. Because so much of what you're saying, David, like I'm like flashing back to reading it yesterday. Like, honestly, I feel like I just needed, well, I'd go on the internet and show you guys, but now that I know that's bad, I'm going to come back to this. one of the amazing things that they pointed out in the article was that what made the difference in Estonia being able to really pull this off was that each individual who volunteered to be part of this kind of truth squad, you know, like I don't know what else to call it. A, they volunteered. B, they took it personally, right? And I think that that's what, like that's the common thread that you both are talking about here, is that the people involved in volunteering to combat misinformation took it personally because they saw how misinformation was directly impacting their community. And it wasn't just their community like, oh, I'm gonna sit in my house and look out my window. It was their community as in my son, my daughter, their teacher, everyone I know who I talk to every day is talking about something that I know to be false, and I take that personally. Like
right, and as much as I love Estonia, it's a wonderful example. It's worth noting. Very small country, 1.1 million people. And they also have a story of people they left behind. There are 50,000 Russians that are not part of that.
Yeah.
And so when people look at it, I'm like, that will not work for larger countries that are diverse, that have, I mean, because you could see Estonia's example playing out very poorly in the United States, where Topeka, Kansas is going to do it, and San Francisco is going to do it, and I can guarantee you the versions
LA's not
that they reach is going to be different.
Yeah, I'm an LA girl. I'm telling you right now, we're not like we're bouncing out. Like we got to go. We're gonna go do our own thing.
Right, but I raise that because I think that points to we've got to think beyond this, and maybe it does recognize what Rousseau said, which is cut your country in half and cut your country in half again, and cut it in half again. But these are real thorny issues that are part of this cognitive Cold War we're in, which is we've got to recognize that it starts first with recognizing we've got to collaborate versus the alternative, because otherwise things are going to end up badly.
Now, how will we get to, Pablo, David, will we get to better cooperation between big tech in the Valley and big government in DC?
Well, first is recognizing big government in DC is a miss, but anyway, that's it.
Misinformation, like we needed like a sign right there. It was like, he did it, bring up the muffin again, right?
But it's also recognizing at the end of the day that we've got to figure out futures of governance in which it's all of us. And it's not just the coast, because you just mentioned the coast, Ray, and that's great. But what about the heartland? What about the fact that 2 years ago, 47% of all the jobs in the country were created in just the top 10 most populous areas?
Yep.
Just last year, it was almost 50% of all the jobs were created in the most top 10 populous areas. At the same time, we're at a 44-year low for mobility in the country. So the very places where they're seeing jobs disappear, they're not able to actually move to places where there are jobs. So unless we figure out that narrative that stitches us all back together again, don't be surprised if divided we fall.
So what are you seeing happening? So 2020, there's a rumor there's an election going on. I don't know if you guys heard anything about this. Like there's stuff happening.
I don't think Pablo and I can talk specifically about politics.
No.
This. One thing that I can guarantee you is come November, there will be a winner and there will be a loser. And whoever is the loser will probably be upset. And the question is, will they gracefully accept the change or will we face something different?
One other thing I'll add to that, because we talked about the autocracy and what that needs to survive and what that needs to fail. Democracy needs something else to thrive. Democracies have to believe in the legitimacy of the rulers. They have to understand and believe the way in which their government works. And if they don't believe in those things, that democracy fails because they don't feel like they're being represented.
100%.
And so what we really need is for whoever wins and for whoever loses to agree that who won and who lost and do the right thing. It's very easy if you lose to find a detail that's not quite right or suspect and focus in on that.
Right.
Here's what I will say. That gives me a little bit of hope. There's no other country on earth that's done what the United States has done, which is for a couple hundred years, pass power from one administration to the other one without a war. And there's no other country that can really say that. And so I think we can pull it together. I think the fact that now it's not just government people and think tank people that are discussing these things, the fact that misinformation is being covered in the news and on the internet and on podcasts like this and in panels, I think more Americans are aware of it. I think more Americans are discussing it. And I think that's going to lead to, with time, a little healthy skepticism. And that's what we need, is a little healthy skepticism where people on polar opposite ends of the spectrum can get together and go, did you see that? Yeah, it kind of looked a little emotionally charged to me. Yeah, it looked emotionally charged to me. Maybe the truth is somewhere to the left or to the right of that.
Yeah.
And then we get back to civil discourse.
I'm going to go ahead and record you and David saying that.
Pablo was saying, I'll give you first a very real possibility that I think we need to start thinking about now, which is we know there's this coronavirus going on. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to be contained, so it's probably going to unfortunately spread throughout the planet. The good news is it looks like the mortality rate is fairly low. But if that coronavirus hits the United States and hits its peak around the October, November, and December time period, do we need to be ready for someone saying certain people weren't able to go to the polls because of the disease outbreak, because we have disparities in our healthcare system here? I think we should start thinking about that now, and we should think about other things that could actually be used as wedge issues to divide whatever comes out of November. Now, on a more optimistic note, I will say this, which is Rousseau actually said what made democracies corrupt is they didn't also think about the good of the community. And I think, Liz, what you've been saying and everything like that, what you really want is a plurality, which is all the hallmarks of what makes a democracy, a representative form of government, work, but also people that think beyond their own self-interest, beyond their own self-happiness, but also the good of the community. The question that I have, and maybe we can talk more at CCE and things like that, is what can be done to motivate people to think beyond their self-interest, beyond their own profit lines, to thinking about the good of the community as a whole?
And I'm just going to record the both of you guys so that like at next Thanksgiving dinner, I can just be like, stop, think, healthy skepticism, hit the pause button, because it's, you know, it is, that's when you tend to hear it all, right? Like when you hear what everyone else is thinking and what everyone else who might not be in technology, who might not, I think we probably, all four of us think about it differently because we are kind of in the tech security government bubble. But man, it's amazing what my mom thinks is happening out there. So sometimes I'm just gonna have my Pablo and David button, and I'm just gonna be like, boop, boop, pause, listen, what's happening.
One of the things you can do is not just that, it's show them the opposite view, the exact opposite narrative from another news source and go, how do you know which one of these is true?
My favorite is to actually show them Al Jazeera because it just really messes with their heads. And I just,
yes, I actually.
And it's exceptional journalism. So I'm like, let me show you this front page.
Well, and I think the other thing is it gets to what President Lincoln said, which is, I do not like that person. I must get to know them better. How many of us in today's polarized and charged era are embodying that second statement of, I must get to know them better?
It's like we're going back to the relationship age, and I kind of dig it. Like I'm not gonna lie, if that's the outcome of all of these hard conversations we're gonna have to have, that we're actually getting back to relationships and actually getting back to a point where we can stop and be like, I wanna learn more about that. I'm not gonna lie, kind of like it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm actually thinking that, you know, if we're gonna fight these battles, and I actually think these are bigger battles of decentralization versus centralization, the way we actually think about open societies versus closed societies, right? I think we will have to come up with a framework to think about how that framework is. I really hope there are think tanks that are working on this problem, right? We know there's teams, you know.
I don't know of any
Where is it,
that might
Where is it?
Atlantic Council. Stay tuned for mid-March for a big, more public announcement, but there might be a think tank or two out there.
Might be a think tank working on this somewhere in DC. I don't know.
And we hope to engage our West Coast partners as well as our Heartland partners. So we don't shout that we're from DC, but I 100%. I think, and this is where I tell people, we're in the middle of a new cognitive Cold War, and that it's worth noting the history of the Atlantic Council. We were created in 1961. When the Democrats from the Truman administration and the Republicans from the Eisenhower administration were so busy fighting amongst each other, they weren't focusing on winning this thing called the Cold War, specifically to make sure societies remain open and markets remain open. And here we are 59 years later, and maybe we need to do it again.
Oh my God. You've heard the last word. No, hopefully, no, this is not the last word on this.
This is the 40th mark of DisrupTV.
I heard that David is going to solve all of this. That's what I heard.
Right. David's actually in all 4 of the boxes you see on your screen right now, and it's been one giant deep fake.
I feel like a puppet. How did that happen? We're live here, episode 177, Disrupt TV, with Pablo Breuer, Dr. David Bray, co-host Liz Miller, and this has been very, very fun. Really talking about a really important issue for the next decade. It's one that we've highlighted on the Constellation research page, a world of deep fakes versus authenticity. Where's that going to take us? Thank you so much, guys, for being on the show.
Thanks guys. You were awesome.
Thanks for having
4 years from now, you got to do us as holograms.
Rail, keep putting up that blueberry muffin background.
Woohoo! All right. We are going to have episode 178 coming up, right? And our list of guests, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be Raj Rao, General Manager for IBM Food Trust, Carolyn Criado Perez, author of Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And of course, one of our favorites, Ron Miller, enterprise reporter at TechCrunch. Now, some quick programming notes, and then Liz, a little comment on your end on what's up on your end, but quick programming notes, our 4th anniversary show. We started February 5th, 2016. Our guests at that point were Whitney Johnson, Brian Fanzo, and Chris Kanarakis. And since then, we've had 383 unique guests, and you can still catch us on Vimeo, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and of course, coast to coast on radio. So final thoughts, final words, Liz, what do you think? Where are we getting all this? We're going to come back to this issue sometime again soon?
I think so. I think this is going to be the issue that we keep talking about throughout the whole decade, because it's going to keep changing. And every time we come up with a new way to engage and a new way to communicate with each other, it's just going to add another layer to this onion. We're just going to have to keep pulling it back. And I think it's really interesting because it's where my worlds collide, right, Ray? Where it's like the world of security and the world of marketing engagement are about to crush. And
what do you call that? What do you call that?
You know what? I call it brand security. I think you have to meet in the middle. And I think that we're starting to see a world in which trust is kind of going down, right? Our consumers don't trust us anymore because we keep having really bad engagements.
No, it's horrible.
Retargeting, stop stalking me with that pair of shoes. I told you I didn't want to hear from you, but now you're pinging me on social, but I didn't want you to call me. We've ignored permissions, we've ignored privacy, and now we're in a point where bad actors can take advantage of it. So we've got to figure out a way. I think what David and Pablo were saying, how do we find a way for Silicon Valley and DC to work together? But quite frankly, and I'm thinking, hey, everyone who watched this, if you're a marketer, do me a favor. Think about one way you can work with your CIO or your CISO better next week, starting on Monday, so that we can actually start building trust back up with our customers. And that's going to see our revenues go up, and we're going to see all sorts of fun stuff. But that's where my head goes. That's what keeps me up at night. What about you, Ray? What's up with you?
Oh, I'm just basically in shock, right, by how easy it is for these fakes to create so much chaos in the world. Yeah. I work with a guy that his job is to ensure that his large social media platform doesn't incite riots, create violences, have civil wars. I mean, there's a whole team dedicated. There's hundreds of people at this company doing that. I won't name the company, but it's crazy, right? That something would have to come down to that. But hey, anyways, welcome to Disrupt TV. Happy Friday. If it's Friday, it's Disrupt TV, 11 a.m. live tapings Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, almost every Friday. So thanks a lot. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for being here, Liz.
Ask for Vala.
Woo! Ask for Vala. Ask for Vala.